Ethan Whitmore picked up his wine glass, turned to the table of investors, and said, with a smile, "Gentlemen, my wife's greatest talent is staying out of the way and making me look like I have good taste in furniture." The table laughed. All 12 of them. Amara sat 3 feet away and felt the sound move through her like cold water. She had heard him say cruel things before. In private. In the car on the way to events. In the kitchen when she burned something or spent $40 too much on groceries. She had learned to absorb those words the way you absorb a small injury. Quickly, quietly, without making a scene. But this was different. This was a dining room full of powerful men laughing at her while she sat there holding a fork. And the worst part, the part she would think about for months afterward, was that she smiled. She actually smiled. Because that was what 5 years of marriage to Ethan Whitmore had trained her to do. If this story made you stop scrolling, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that restaurant. And the night Amara finally stopped smiling. The restaurant was called Harlow and Pine, and it sat on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Vancouver, with a view that cost more than most people's monthly rent just to sit near. Ethan had reserved the private dining room 3 weeks in advance. He had told Amara it was an important evening. Investors from Seoul and Toronto, men whose money could reshape the next 5 years of his company. He needed her to be present, composed, and quiet. Those were his exact words. Present, composed, quiet. Amara had worn the black dress he preferred. She had pulled her hair back the way he liked. She had arrived on time, sat where she was told to sit, and ordered the least expensive thing on the menu because Ethan always noticed when she didn't. She had laughed at the right moments and stayed silent at the right moments and refilled her water glass twice without asking anyone to do it for her. She had been, by every measure he had established, a perfect wife, and still. He had looked across the table at a man named Gerald Park, older, gray-haired, the kind of investor whose approval Ethan had been chasing for 18 months. And he had said it. Not quietly, not under his breath, not with any hesitation at all. "Gentlemen, my wife's greatest talent is staying out of the way and making me look like I have good taste in furniture." Gerald Park had laughed first, then the others followed, the way people follow laughter when they want to belong to something. Even the 2 men who looked briefly uncomfortable quickly adjusted their expressions and joined in. Amara sat very still. She was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the weight of the fork in her hand and the distance between herself and the door and the exact temperature of the room, which was 68 degrees and somehow felt like nothing at all. She was aware that Ethan was watching her, not with concern, but with expectation, waiting to see if she would hold herself together or embarrass him. She smiled. She picked up her water glass and took a sip and set it down and kept smiling. And Ethan turned back to Gerald Park and said, "Anyway, the real question is the Seoul distribution timeline." And the conversation moved on, as if she were not there, as if she had never been there at all. The dinner lasted 2 more hours. Amara ate approximately half of her sea bass and drank 1 glass of white wine very slowly, because she had learned years ago that drinking too quickly at Ethan's events made her say things she couldn't take back. She listened to men talk about money and logistics and market positioning and the kind of abstract power that exists only in conference rooms and airport lounges. She answered 2 questions directed at her, one about Vancouver's restaurant scene, one about whether she had traveled to Korea, with answers that were pleasant and brief and instantly forgettable. She was so good at this. That was the thing that kept surfacing in her mind as the evening went on. She was genuinely, frighteningly good at disappearing inside her own life. She had practiced it so long that it no longer felt like performance. It felt like nature. When the check came, Ethan paid without looking at it, which meant it was either reasonable or impressive, and he didn't care which. The investors shook hands with him warmly. Gerald Park said something in Korean to one of the other men, and they both smiled at Ethan like they had decided something. Ethan shook Gerald's hand twice. Then he turned to Amara and said very quietly, "Good job tonight." Like she was staff. Like she was a member of the catering team who had cleared plates efficiently and not dropped anything. "Thank you," she said, because that, too, was what she had been trained to say. The coat check was near the elevator bank on the 42nd floor, and while Ethan went to retrieve their coats, Amara stood by the window and looked out at Vancouver below. The city was lit up and cold and completely indifferent to the fact that she had just spent 2 hours being publicly reduced to a piece of furniture by the man she had married. She looked at her own reflection in the glass. She barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different. She looked exactly the same as she always did in this dress, with this hair, wearing this careful expression. She didn't recognize herself because the woman looking back at her had been standing in that reflection for 5 years and had never once walked away from it. Ethan came back with her coat and held it out for her. She didn't take it. He looked at her. "Amara." "I'm cold," she said. "I'll take the coat." "Then take it." He shook it slightly, impatient. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way you look at something when you are finally ready to see it clearly, and said nothing. She reached out and took the coat from his hands and put it on herself and turned back toward the elevator. "What is wrong with you?" he said, quietly enough that no one near them could hear. "Nothing," she said, and she pressed the elevator button, and the doors opened, and she stepped inside. In the elevator, Ethan stood beside her and looked at his phone. He scrolled through something, emails probably, or messages from Gerald Park's assistant, with the calm, focused energy of a man who had filed the evening away as a success and was already thinking about what came next. Amara stared at the elevator doors. She thought about the first time she had met Ethan, 7 years ago at a fundraiser for a hospital foundation, back when she was still working as a registered nurse, and he was presenting a check on behalf of his company. He had been charming in the specific way that certain successful men are charming, attentive, funny, genuinely interested in what she said. He had asked her about her work with a curiosity that felt real. He had remembered things she mentioned and brought them up later. She had thought, "This is a man who sees me." She knew now what that had actually been. It had been assessment. He had been looking at her the way you look at something you are considering acquiring, evaluating its quality, its presentation, whether it would hold up under pressure, whether it would make you look good. She had passed the evaluation, and then she had spent 5 years finding out what that meant. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. Ethan was already walking toward the valet stand, his phone to his ear, speaking to someone in the low, authoritative voice he used when he wanted to signal that he was important and very busy. Amara followed 3 steps behind him, which was the distance she had learned to maintain at these events, and then she stopped. She stood in the middle of the hotel lobby and stopped walking. Ethan reached the valet stand and turned back. He saw her standing 20 feet away and made a gesture, a small, impatient tilt of his head that meant, "Come on." She looked at him. She thought about the furniture comment. She thought about the dinner. She thought about the 5 years she had compressed her nursing degree into a memory she was not allowed to discuss because Ethan found it awkward to explain why his wife had quit a job she was good at. She thought about the $900 she had saved, very slowly, from the grocery allowance he gave her, $20 here, $15 there, folded into a sock in the back of her drawer, because some part of her had always known, without admitting it, that she might need to leave quickly and without warning. $900. That was what 5 years of her life had come to. $900, an address she hated, and a reflection she didn't recognize. Ethan made the gesture again. "Come on." Amara turned and walked toward the lobby doors. Not toward him, toward the doors. She heard him say her name, once, then again, sharper, and she pushed through the glass door and stepped outside into the Vancouver winter, and the cold hit her like a correction. The snow had started while they were inside. It was not heavy snow, just the quiet, persistent kind that falls without drama and covers everything slowly, the kind of snow that doesn't announce itself. The street outside the hotel was mostly empty. A few cabs idled at the curb. A couple walked past under a shared umbrella without looking at her. Amara stood on the sidewalk in her thin black dress and her coat, the coat she had put on herself, and she breathed in the cold air and felt something she had not felt in years. The air went in and out, and nothing bad happened. She took another breath, and still nothing bad happened. Behind her, she heard the lobby door open. She heard Ethan's voice, no longer quiet or controlled, saying, "Amara, what the hell are you doing? The car is right there. Gerald Park's assistant just texted." She started walking. "Amara." She walked faster. "Do not, Amara, this is not, you cannot just." She turned a corner and he stopped following. She didn't know if it was because he gave up or because he decided a scene on the street was bad for his image. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself to keep walking. She walked 3 blocks before she realized she had no plan, no destination, and exactly $900 in a small envelope in the inside pocket of her coat, which she had put there 3 weeks ago and had been carrying ever since without quite knowing why. Now she knew why. The cold was real. The snow was real. The fact that she had nowhere to go was very, very real. She had left the apartment, Ethan's apartment, his name on the lease, his furniture, his carefully chosen everything, with nothing except what she was wearing and what was in her coat pocket. She pulled out her phone and looked at it. No messages yet. He would message eventually. He would calculate when to be apologetic and when to be threatening, and he would deploy whichever one seemed more efficient. She knew his patterns, the way you know the patterns of weather that has been happening around you for years. She turned her phone face down in her hand and kept walking. She walked for nearly 40 minutes. Her feet, in the heeled shoes Ethan preferred, had started to hurt by the end of the first block. By the 20-minute mark, she could feel the cold through the soles and up into her ankles. She had stopped paying attention to where she was going. She knew this part of downtown Vancouver well enough to not get lost. But she wasn't navigating toward anything. She was just moving because stopping felt like something she couldn't afford. She passed a closed bookstore, a lit pharmacy, a bar with music leaking out from under the door. She passed a woman walking a very small dog who looked at Amara's thin dress with an expression of brief concern and then looked away. She was shivering by the time she turned onto a narrow street between 2 older buildings, the kind of street that exists in every downtown core and that most people walk past without noticing. And she almost walked past it. Almost. But there was light coming from ground level, warm amber light that spilled through a half-frosted window, and below it, barely visible on a dark wooden sign with small Korean characters and an English subtitle, Seorak Lounge and Kitchen, Private. She stood in front of it. She was cold enough that her hands had stopped feeling like her hands. She had $900, no plan, and approximately 1 more hour of walking in these shoes before something gave out. She looked at the door. It was heavy, dark wood with a brass handle, and it was not marked with a menu or hours or the aggressive cheerfulness of a place trying to attract customers. It looked like a place that didn't need customers to find it. It was the kind of door you had to decide to open. Amara thought about Ethan's voice saying furniture, and about the sound of 12 men laughing, and about her own reflection in the 42nd floor window. And she reached out and opened the door. Inside, it was warm. That was the first thing. The warmth, hitting her skin in a way that almost hurt because she hadn't realized how cold she had gotten. The second thing was the music. Low, unhurried jazz. Not the aggressive background kind, but the kind that exists for itself and happens to be audible. The third thing was that the room was nearly empty. 4 tables. A long wooden bar. Soft overhead lights that cast more shadow than brightness. The smell of something cooking, broth, and something deeper, ginger maybe, or sesame. And beneath it the faint, clean smell of cedar. There were 2 people at the bar, speaking quietly in Korean. A woman in her 50s behind the counter, and at the far corner table, partially in shadow, a man. Amara stood just inside the door. The woman behind the bar looked up. She had the steady, unsurprised expression of someone who had worked in hospitality for 30 years and no longer found anything particularly remarkable. "Come in," she said simply. Amara came in. She chose a table near the far wall, away from the bar, away from the man in the corner. She sat down and put her coat on the chair beside her and noticed her hands were still shaking slightly, which she found embarrassing even though no one was watching. She pressed them flat against the table and looked at the menu, which was simple and handwritten and included both Korean and English, and tried to look like a person who came to quiet Korean lounges alone on Tuesday nights in the snow. A server appeared, young, efficient, not unkind, and asked if she'd like to start with something warm. "Tea," Amara said. "Whatever you recommend." He nodded and was gone. She put her phone on the table. Ethan had sent 2 messages. She looked at both of them without opening them so the read receipt wouldn't trigger, and turned the phone face down again. She was aware without looking up that the man in the corner was watching her. Not the way men sometimes watch women alone in bars. Not with that particular category of attention that makes you track the exits. It was something quieter, more measured, the kind of attention that doesn't announce itself. She looked up. He was Korean, probably mid-40s, wearing a dark jacket over a simple shirt. He had the kind of face that didn't give much away. Not hostile, not warm, just present. There was a glass of something in front of him and a phone face down on the table, which she noticed because she had just done the same thing. He didn't look away when she met his eyes. Most people look away. It's the social reflex. You get caught watching someone and you redirect, pretend it was accidental. He didn't. He held her gaze for 2 full seconds, calm and unhurried, and then he picked up his glass and looked at it. The tea arrived. It was barley, fragrant and very hot, and Amara wrapped both hands around it and felt her fingers begin to come back. She didn't know what she was going to do tomorrow. She didn't know where she was going to sleep. She didn't know how $900 became rent and a lawyer and food and whatever came after. She didn't know any of it. But the tea was warm, and no one in this room had laughed at her. And for right now, that was enough to keep sitting down. The man in the corner set down his glass. He did not look up, but in a voice that carried quietly across the nearly empty room, without introduction, without making it into anything larger than it was, he said, "You look like someone who finally chose herself." Amara's hands tightened around the cup. She did not answer, but she did not leave. Amara didn't answer him right away. She kept both hands around the tea and looked down at the surface of it, the pale amber color, the thin curl of steam, and she thought about what it meant that a stranger's 7 words had landed harder than anything her husband had said to her in 5 years. That was its own kind of information. She filed it somewhere in the back of her chest and breathed. "That's an interesting thing to say to someone you don't know," she said finally. "It's an observation." His voice was low and even. Not American, not quite. The English was precise, the cadence slightly different. "You don't have to confirm it." She looked up then. He was still looking at his glass, not at her, which she found oddly respectful. Most men who said things across rooms wanted you to look at them afterward, wanted the acknowledgement. He seemed completely indifferent to whether she responded at all. "Are you always this forward with strangers?" she asked. He considered this. "No." "Then why tonight?" He set his glass down. "Because you walked in here in December wearing a dress with no scarf, and your hands were shaking when you sat down, and you turned your phone over so you wouldn't have to look at it." He finally looked at her. "And you haven't cried. Most people in that situation cry." Amara felt something move through her that she didn't have a name for. Not warmth exactly, more like the sensation of being accurately read by something you didn't expect to be legible. "Maybe I'm not most people," she said. "No," he said simply. "You're not." The server brought him something, a small dish, steam rising, and the man said something in Korean, brief and quiet, and the server nodded and disappeared again. He didn't make it a performance. He didn't look at her while he did it, the way some men look at you while conducting other business, to make sure you're registering how important they are. He just ordered his food and came back to his drink. "I'm not looking for company," Amara said. She meant it, but she noticed she hadn't moved. "I know," he said. "I'm not offering any." She almost laughed. It came up in her throat unexpectedly, and she pressed it back down because laughing felt dangerous right now, so it felt like it might turn into something else without warning. "Then what are you offering?" He looked at her for a moment. "Information, if you want it." "What kind of information?" "The kind that might be useful to someone who just left somewhere and has no idea what to do next." Amara's jaw tightened. "You don't know that I left anywhere." "No," he agreed. "I don't." The silence held. The jazz moved through it, unhurried. "My name is Jun Ho," he said. She didn't offer hers back. He didn't seem to expect her to. She left 20 minutes later with a name on a paper napkin. Not his name, but a lawyer's name, and below it, a phone number. And she walked back out into the snow feeling something she couldn't quite categorize. Not hope. She had learned to be suspicious of hope the way you learn to be suspicious of anything that has burned you repeatedly. Something smaller than hope. Something more like the awareness that a door existed. She found a hotel 4 blocks away. Not expensive, not cheap, the kind of place that has a 24-hour front desk and doesn't ask questions, and paid cash for 2 nights, which took $320 out of her $900 and left her with $580, and the beginning of a headache. The room was small and beige, and the heater was loud but functional. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened Ethan's messages. The first one, Where are you? Not a question, a command written as a statement. The second one, sent 11 minutes later. This is embarrassing and you know it. Call me. She put the phone on the nightstand and lay back on the bed in her dress and her coat and stared at the ceiling and waited to feel something she could identify. What she felt instead was tired. Not the tired that comes from a long day. The tired that comes from years of spending enormous amounts of energy on something that was never going to give you anything back. She fell asleep with the light on. Ethan called 17 times before 11 a.m. the next morning. She knew because she counted. She watched each call come in and ring out on the nightstand screen without picking up, and each time she made a deliberate decision, not yet. Not until she had something to stand on. At 9:30, she called the lawyer's number from the napkin. A woman answered on the second ring, professional, crisp, not unkind. Her name was Ms. Cho, and she said she had been expecting a call, which made Amara go very still. Expecting it from whom? Amara asked. From anyone who might call from that number, Ms. Cho said carefully. We work with a number of referral situations. It's not unusual. That answer was too smooth to be completely true, but Amara was in no position to interrogate it. She had $580, and a loud heater, and a husband who called 17 times before noon. She made an appointment for the following morning. Then she sat by the window with the bad hotel coffee and the thin winter light, and thought about what she actually had. She had a nursing license that had been inactive for 4 years because Ethan had made it clear, in the careful way he made things clear, that working was inconvenient to the image he was building. She had a gap in her employment history she would have to explain. She had no lease in her name, no utilities, no car. Everything had been Ethan's, structured that way deliberately, though at the time she had told herself it was practicality. She had a degree and a brain and 9 years of experience before she'd stopped, and 4 years of being told those things weren't necessary. She had a name on a napkin from a stranger in a quiet Korean lounge. She pulled out the napkin and looked at it again. Junho. She hadn't given him her name. He hadn't asked for it. That either meant he was genuinely uninterested or it meant he already knew it, and both possibilities made something tighten at the base of her throat. She went back to the lounge that evening. She told herself it was because she had questions. That was partially true. She also had nowhere else to go, and the hotel room was making her feel like she was disappearing, and there was something about that place. The warmth of it, the music, the way no one had looked at her like she needed to be managed. That pulled at her. The same woman was behind the bar. The room was similarly quiet, and at the same corner table, as if the previous night had simply paused and resumed, was Junho. He looked up when she walked in. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprised, not quite. And he gave a slight nod toward the chair across from him. She could have sat somewhere else. She sat across from him. You called the number, he said. How do you know? Ms. Cho told me someone had called. Amara set her bag on the table slowly. She said she was expecting a referral call. She didn't say from you. She wouldn't. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because my name complicates things. And right now your situation doesn't need more complications. What does that mean? Your name complicates things. He picked up his glass and held it, but didn't drink. It means I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a social worker, and what I'm offering you isn't charity. It's a practical arrangement. What kind of practical arrangement? The legal work is real. Ms. Cho is excellent. She's handled situations like yours before. The process will take time, but it can be done properly. He set the glass down. In the meantime, if you need somewhere safe to stay that isn't a hotel you're paying cash for, I have a property outside the city. Staff, security, private. You wouldn't be obligated to anything. Ms. Cho's office was on the 14th floor of a building in the West End, and it smelled like strong coffee and old paper in the specific combination of a place that handles serious problems. Ms. Cho herself was a Korean-Canadian woman in her early 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of economy of expression that Amara immediately respected. She didn't waste words on comfort, and she didn't pretend the situation was simpler than it was. She had read the preliminary details. She asked Amara to walk her through the marriage, financials, housing, employment history, any documentation she had access to. Amara laid it out methodically, the way she had learned to present patient histories, chronological, precise, without editorializing. Ms. Cho listened without interrupting, made notes in a small leather-covered book, and asked 2 clarifying questions. When Amara finished, Ms. Cho set her pen down. He controls the primary accounts. Everything is in his name. Your nursing license is current? Lapsed. I can apply for reinstatement. Good. Ms. Cho looked at her. I want to be direct with you, Ms. Bennett. The financial situation is going to be the most complicated element. He structured things in a way that's going to require documentation to untangle, and documentation takes time. The question of where you stay in the interim is significant. I know. Mr. Kang's property is secure. I've referred clients there before. She said it without inflection, as if it were simply information. I understand you have reservations. I have reservations about a powerful stranger offering me a house. That's intelligent. Ms. Cho folded her hands on the desk. My professional advice is to treat it as a logistical solution to a logistical problem and nothing more. You'll have your own space, staff who are professional, and my firm will remain in regular contact throughout. Amara looked at the window. The Vancouver skyline was gray and bright in the way it gets in December, sharp-edged and cold. Who is he? She asked. Actually, Ms. Cho's expression didn't shift. He's a client who refers people in need of legal assistance. That's not what I asked. A small pause. I know, Ms. Cho said, and that answer is the one I'm able to give you. She called Ethan that afternoon. She chose a bench in a park 2 blocks from the hotel, outdoors, on the theory that she thought better when she was moving or could move if she needed to. The snow from the previous night had crusted over and the bench was cold through her coat. He picked up on the first ring. Where are you? Again, the command is statement. I'm safe, she said. I wanted you to know that. I'm not concerned about safe, Amara. I'm concerned about what you think you're doing. I'm filing for divorce. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted. I'm sorry? His voice had changed, not softer, more precise, the way his voice got when he was recalibrating. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. I wanted to tell you directly, rather than have it arrive through official channels without warning. You're serious? Yes. Amara. He exhaled. Last night I was performing for those men. You know how these dinners work. You've been to 30 of them. I know exactly how they work, she said. That's not the point. Then what is the point? The point is that I've been disappearing for 5 years and I'm done. Another silence. This one felt different, colder. You don't have money, he said. I know. You don't have a place to stay. I know. You don't have... Ethan. Her voice was very quiet. I know what I don't have. I've been keeping the list for years. She heard him breathe, heard the particular quality of a man who is realizing that the thing he believed he controlled has already moved. Who have you been talking to? He asked. A lawyer. Which lawyer? Where did you find... How did you... Through a referral, she said. From who? She said nothing. Amara. From who? She stood up from the bench. I'll be in touch through legal channels. Don't call this number again. She ended the call. Her hands were shaking again, not from cold this time, and she put the phone in her pocket and stood there in the park with the icy path in front of her and breathed the freezing air in and out until the shaking slowed. She had said it out loud. To him. It was the most terrifying thing she had done in years, and it was also, somehow, the first thing in years that had felt like it actually belonged to her. She moved to Junho's estate 3 days later. The car that came for her was dark and quiet, driven by a man named Daniel, who spoke only to confirm the destination and to ask if she needed the heat adjusted. She sat in the back with the single bag she had accumulated, toiletries, 2 changes of clothes she'd bought cheaply, her documents, and watched the city thin out into forest and then mountain and then a long private road through trees that opened eventually into a property that looked nothing like what she had imagined. She had imagined something imposing, something that broadcast power. The house was large but not showy, modern, low-slung, dark wood and glass that seemed to be trying to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. There were lights on inside, warm and domestic. The grounds were snow-covered and quiet. Daniel opened her door and she stepped out and stood for a moment in the cold air. Junho came out of the front door. He was wearing a dark gray pullover instead of the jacket from the restaurant, and he looked in this context slightly different. Not less controlled, but less performed. like a version of himself with fewer people watching. This is more than I expected, she said. It's a house, he said. Come inside. She followed him in. The interior was warm. There were books on several shelves, a kitchen that smelled of something cooking, floors that were polished wood over radiant heat. A housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Park, introduced briefly, nodded at Amara and continued what she was doing. Junho showed her to a room on the east side of the house. It had its own bathroom, its own entrance to a small corridor, and a window that faced the mountains. It's yours, he said. Mrs. Park can get you anything you need. Thank you, Amara said. She meant it. That made it complicated. She was looking at the room when she heard something, a small sound from down the hall. Footsteps. Light, quick, not adult. She turned. A girl stood in the hallway doorway. 9 years old, maybe 10. Small, dark-haired, wearing paint-stained socks, and holding a sketchbook against her chest like armor. She was looking at Amara with an expression of direct, uncurated assessment that only children and certain adults could produce. Junho said, in a tone that was noticeably different from the one he used with adults, softer at the edges, more patient. Sora, this is Ms. Bennett. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sora looked at Amara carefully. Are you in trouble? She asked. Sora, it's okay, Amara said. She looked at the girl. A little bit, yes. Sora seemed to consider this. Appa was in trouble once, she said. He got through it. Junho looked at his daughter with an expression that moved across his face and was gone in less than a second, too quick to fully read, but not quick enough to hide. Come have dinner, he said to both of them. But Amara had been at the estate for 6 days when Ethan's name started appearing in ways that told her something was wrong. Ms. Cho called on a Thursday morning. Her voice had the same professional evenness it always had, but there was something underneath it. Your husband has retained representation, she said. I expected that. Yes. What I didn't expect is the approach they're taking. A pause. They're not contesting the divorce. They're contesting your competence to manage your own affairs. They've filed a motion suggesting you're in a state of psychological instability. Amara went very still. He's claiming I'm unstable. He's not claiming it directly. He's suggesting it to the court through careful language that implies you made decisions while emotionally compromised and may require their word, guidance in the interim period. The coldness moved through her slowly, the way real cold does. Not a shock, but a creeping. He's trying to make me look incapable, she said. He's trying to control the narrative before it controls him, Ms. Cho said, which suggests my team may have found something he doesn't want found. What did you find? Another pause. We're still documenting, but there are financial patterns that suggest accounts your husband has not disclosed. Money moved in ways that don't align with reported income. We need more time, but Ms. Bennett, if what we're seeing is accurate, your husband has been engaged in financial manipulation at a significant scale. Amara stood at the window of her room and looked at the mountains and breathed carefully. He knows you're looking, she said. He suspects someone is. He doesn't know who. And when he finds out I have legal support, real support, he will escalate, Ms. Cho said simply. Yes, prepare for that. That evening, Junho found her in the greenhouse attached to the east side of the house, a long, glass-enclosed space where Mrs. Park grew herbs and a few fruit trees that had no business surviving a Vancouver winter, but did anyway. Amara had found it 2 days ago and had started sitting there in the evenings because it was warm and smelled like growing things and felt somehow like the most honest room in the house. He sat across from her without asking if he was interrupting. She had noticed this about him. He seemed to understand the difference between solitude that needed protecting and solitude that was actually loneliness wearing a more dignified face. Ms. Cho called me, he said. I know, she called me first. He was quiet for a moment. Ethan Whitmore has resources. I know he does. He'll use them aggressively if he feels cornered. She looked at him. Are you warning me or telling me something I don't know? I'm telling you what my people found. He said it carefully. Because you should know. She went still. Your people. I have people who look at things. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. Junho. She said his name directly for the first time and watched something register in his face. Barely, just a small shift. Who are you? Not what Miss Cho says, not the careful version. Who are you actually? He held her gaze. The greenhouse was quiet around them. A faucet somewhere dripped. Outside, the mountain was dark, and the sky was beginning to produce more snow, slow and relentless, and the glass above them caught the flakes and held them for a second before they melted. I run things, he said finally. Businesses, arrangements. Some of them are not things that get discussed in lawyers' offices or city halls. He said it without apology and without drama, the way someone states a fact they made peace with long ago. Amara felt the shape of it settle over her. She had suspected. She had let herself not know, because not knowing was more comfortable, and her situation required comfort where she could find it. But the security at the gate, the staff who moved with a particular kind of trained awareness, the way Ms. Cho had not answered when Amara asked who Junho really was, all of it had been building into a picture she had been politely avoiding. How dangerous? She asked. To you? Not at all. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. Dangerous enough that Ethan Whitmore, when he finds out whose protection you're under, will have a decision to make. And what decision is that? Whether to keep pushing, Junho said, or whether to take what he can and walk away. Amara breathed in the greenhouse air. Wet earth, green, warm, and looked at her hands in her lap and felt the full weight of where she was. Not just in this room. In this situation. She had walked out of a restaurant into the snow looking for air, and she had ended up inside the orbit of something she did not fully understand, protected by a man whose power she could not verify, and whose intentions she could not completely trust, while her husband was building a legal case designed to make her look like she couldn't take care of herself. She had no road back. Whatever happened next, the version of her life that had existed 3 weeks ago, the careful, compressed, smiling version, was finished. She had known it on the sidewalk outside the hotel. She had known it when she said the word divorce out loud to Ethan's silence. She knew it now. The question was what came next, and the answer to that was something she could not yet see from where she was sitting. I should leave, she said. She didn't move. Junho watched her without speaking. Everyone around you gets hurt eventually, she said. That's how these things work. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and flat and more honest than anything she had heard in years. Your existence was never the problem, he said. Someone else's cruelty was. Amara looked at him. He held her gaze and didn't soften it, and didn't dress it up, and didn't wait for her to validate it. And from somewhere deeper in the house, down the hall past the kitchen and the warm lights and the books on the shelves, came the sound of Sora laughing at something, a sudden, unguarded sound, real and bright. And it moved through the greenhouse walls and into the space between them and settled there. Amara closed her eyes. When she opened them, she had not left. And she understood, with a clarity that had the weight of a door closing behind her, that she was not going to, not tonight, and not for reasons she could yet fully explain to herself, but the decision had been made somewhere below language, in the part of her that was done pretending it didn't matter where she stood. Outside, Ethan Whitmore sat in his car 2 blocks from the estate's access road, phone pressed to his ear, speaking to someone whose name he would not say out loud, and said 4 words that meant the quiet phase of this situation was over. Ethan made his call at 11:47 p.m. Amara didn't know that yet. She was in her room on the east side of the house, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, staring at a wall that was not giving her anything useful. The greenhouse conversation was still in her body. Not her head, her body. The way significant things sometimes settle into muscle and bone before the mind catches up with what they mean. She had not left. She was still thinking about why. Down the hall, she could hear the house settling into itself for the night. The soft sounds of Mrs. Park finishing in the kitchen, a door closing somewhere. The particular silence of a large building when most of the people in it are either asleep or trying to be. She heard Junho's footsteps pass her door without stopping, heard him go to Sora's room, heard the low murmur of his voice through 2 walls as he spoke to his daughter in Korean, not loud enough to make out words, but with a cadence she recognized. The particular rhythm of a parent saying goodnight to a child they are afraid for, steady on the surface, something held underneath. She lay back on the bed, fully dressed, and looked at the ceiling. She thought about what he had said. Your existence was never the problem. Someone else's cruelty was. She had been told many things in her life. She had been told she was difficult and oversensitive and that she took things too personally and that her expectations were unrealistic and that she didn't understand how the world worked. Ethan had a comprehensive vocabulary for her failures. She had absorbed most of it without meaning to, the way you absorb language you hear constantly. It starts to feel like truth not because it is, but because repetition is its own kind of proof. 7 words from a stranger in a restaurant, 8 more in a greenhouse. And something had cracked open that she hadn't been able to crack open herself in 5 years. She fell asleep without meaning to, shoes still on, lights still on. She woke at 4 a.m. to the sound of voices. Not loud. That was what made her sit up. The deliberate quietness of it. The sound of people who were trying not to be heard doing something that required coordination. She lay still for a moment and listened. The voices were outside or near the outer walls, and they had the particular quality of male voices running on adrenaline, keeping themselves controlled. She got up and went to the window. The grounds were dark and snow-covered, and at first she saw nothing. Then she saw the movement, 2 figures crossing the far edge of the property near the tree line, moving with the low, quick gait of people who knew exactly where they were going and were counting on not being seen. One of them stopped and looked toward the house, and in that moment, for less than 2 seconds, she saw his face catch the light from one of the estate's perimeter lamps. She didn't recognize him, but she understood what she was looking at. She stepped back from the window and went into the hallway and moved toward Junho's side of the house quickly, keeping her footsteps light on the warm floors. She knocked on his door. 1 knock, hard. The door opened in 4 seconds. He was already dressed. That was the first thing she registered. Not in pajamas, not half awake, fully dressed, dark jacket, alert in the specific way of someone who had not been sleeping at all. He looked at her face. You saw them. 2 men, the east tree line. There are 4, he said. 2 more on the south perimeter. He said it without drama, without the theatrical calm of a man performing composure. He was simply calm. Like this was a situation he had a set of responses for and he was running through them methodically. Ethan, she said. Most likely. He looked past her down the corridor. Sora is already with Mrs. Park in the interior room. They'll stay there. Junho, I need you to go back to your room and stay away from the windows. He said it directly, no softening, which she was grateful for. Daniel and the security team are already managing the perimeter. This will be handled. This will be handled, she repeated. 4 men on your property, in the middle of the night, and that's Amara. He said her name the way you say something when you need someone to stop and actually hear you. This is not the first time someone has made a move against this house. My team is better than what's out there. I need you to trust that for the next hour. She looked at him. His face in the low corridor light was steady and unreadable, and she was suddenly, clearly aware of the distance between what she had allowed herself to understand about this man and what was actually true. He had told her in the greenhouse, he had said it plainly, I run things. Arrangements. Some of them are not things that get discussed in lawyers' offices. She had nodded and processed it abstractly and continued to sit in his greenhouse and eat dinner at his table and let his daughter show her drawings of imaginary cities. What was happening outside the walls right now was the concrete version of that abstraction. Go back to your room, he said. She went. It lasted 50 minutes. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall beside the bed, away from the window, below the sight line. And she listened. She heard almost nothing, which was its own kind of terrible. No shots, no shouting, just the occasional low voice on what she assumed was a radio or a phone. And once, a brief sound of physical struggle that stopped quickly. The silence after it was heavier than the silence before. At 5:10 a.m., someone knocked on her door. It was Daniel. He was a large man with a quiet manner, and he looked completely unruffled except for a small cut along his jawline that had been pressed with a cloth. Mr. Kong asks if you're all right, he said. I'm all right. What happened? The situation has been resolved. Mr. Kong will explain. Is everyone here is fine. He said it with the flat precision of someone giving a report. The individuals on the property have been secured. She followed him home. The room Junho used as an office was at the rear of the house. Bookshelves, a wide desk, a window that faced the mountain. He was standing when she came in, Not behind the desk, but beside it, phone in his hand, speaking to someone in Korean in short, clipped sentences. He looked up when she entered and held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes, and she sat in the chair across from the desk and waited. He finished the call and set the phone down. Sit, she said. You're making me nervous. He sat. He looked at her with something that might have been, under different circumstances, close to amusement. You're telling me to sit down in my own office. Someone needs to. He sat. He set his hands flat on the desk, and she noticed a bruise forming across his knuckles, fresh and dark. And she looked at it and then looked at his face, and he didn't comment on it. Tell me what happened, she said. 4 men. Hired privately, not professional. The kind of people you find when you want something done without using anyone who can be traced back to you cleanly. He said it with a precise contempt that had nothing to do with performance. They were here to bring you back. That was the instruction. Bring me back. The word sat in her mouth wrong. He sent people to physically remove me. Yes. From your property. Yes. She breathed carefully. He knew I was here. He found out 2 days ago. We knew he found out. We didn't know when he'd move. He looked at her steadily. I should have told you that. I made a decision not to alarm you, and it was the wrong decision. That landed. He said it without hedging, without the particular soft-shouldered apology that men used when they wanted to appear accountable without being accountable. He simply said, I was wrong. Where are they now? She asked. The men. Being held. The evidence of who hired them is being gathered. And then? And then it becomes leverage. He said it the same way he said everything, matter of fact. Not violence. Leverage. Ethan Whitmore loses the option of pretending this didn't happen. She stood up. She wasn't sure why. Sitting felt wrong, too passive. She walked to the window and looked at the dark mountain and the slow early light beginning at its edges. He told me I was unstable, she said. In the legal filing. He's saying I'm psychologically compromised. She turned around. And now he sends 4 men to take me in the night. If one of them had managed it, if I had been taken from here, his lawyers would have walked into court with a woman who'd been retrieved from a dangerous situation and a filing that said she couldn't make sound decisions. She heard her own voice and was briefly surprised at how cold it was. That's not rage. That's a plan. Junho looked at her. Yes. He built this, not just tonight. The whole structure, the legal motion, the narrative, the men at your perimeter. He built this before he made any of those calls. He's been planning it since I walked out of that restaurant. My team thinks he had the outline in place before that, possibly as a contingency. He said it carefully, watching her face. Your husband has been preparing for the possibility that you would leave for some time. The room went very quiet. Amara stood at the window and let that sit in her. 5 years of a marriage, and within it, running alongside it, a structure designed to contain her if she tried to escape. Not reactive, proactive. He had not begun planning when she walked out. He had begun planning at some point while she was still there, still smiling, still filling her water glass herself, and laughing at the right moments. While she was still performing the role of the perfect wife, he was already building the cage for when she stopped. How long, she said. How long has he been moving money? At least 3 years, Junho said. Possibly longer. She turned away from the window. I want to see the documentation. Amara, I want to see it, she said, and her voice had an edge that she didn't try to soften. I spent 5 years in that marriage. I watched him manage accounts and move numbers and build his empire, and I accepted that it wasn't my domain because that was the arrangement, and I was performing the arrangement, and I need to see what was actually happening while I was doing that. He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a folder and set it in front of her. She sat down and opened it. The documentation took her 2 hours to move through. She was not a financial expert. She was a nurse, which meant she was trained to read complex information quickly and identify the thing that didn't fit, the value that was outside the normal range, the indicator that told you something was wrong before the patient felt it. She applied that same reading to the pages in front of her, and what she found made her throat tight in a way that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the specific cold recognition of having been comprehensively deceived. The accounts were real. The movement was real. 3 years of money flowing through structures designed to be opaque, shell accounts, business entities registered in names she didn't recognize, transfers timed to avoid reporting thresholds, amounts that would have been relevant to her divorce settlement, amounts that represented assets she had a legal claim to. Hidden. Deliberately, systematically, carefully hidden. And on page 11 of the folder, in a line of documentation she almost missed because her eyes were tired and the numbers were dense, was something else. A name. Her name. Amara Bennett Whitmore. Listed as a signatory on 2 accounts she had never heard of, had never signed for, had never been told existed. She stared at it. Junho, she said. He came around the desk and looked at where she was pointing. He went very still. I didn't sign these, she said. I've never seen these accounts. My name is on these accounts, and I have never once, I see it. What does that mean? What does it mean that my name is on accounts I didn't know existed? He straightened slowly. It means that if those accounts contain funds that were moved illegally, Ethan's legal team has documentation that appears to put you in the chain. He said it quietly, not softening it. It means that the narrative isn't just that you're psychologically unstable, it's that you were a participant. The room seemed to shift slightly. She had the physical sensation of standing on something that had just moved. He forged my signature. Or had it forged, yes. And kept it. Against exactly this possibility. He sat down across from her, leaned forward. He was never planning to just let you go, Amara. If you stayed, he kept the marriage and the control. If you left, he had documentation that put you in legal jeopardy. Either way he wins, she said. Her voice was flat and strange in her own ears. She closed the folder. She put her hands on top of it and pressed down slightly, as if she could keep the contents inside through pressure. She had walked out of a restaurant 18 days ago. She had stood on a sidewalk in the snow with $900 and a thin dress, and she had thought, I'm finally choosing myself. She had thought, the hardest part is over. She had thought, in the hotel room with the loud heater, lying on her back fully dressed, that she had finally found the bottom and could now push off from it. She had not found the bottom. The bottom was a forged signature on a financial document that turned her from a victim of her husband's crimes into a co-conspirator. Ms. Cho arrived at the estate by 8 that morning. She had the folder on the desk in front of her within 6 minutes of walking in the door. She read in silence. She turned pages with the steady, unhurried efficiency of someone who was taking in information and filing it in real time. And Amara sat across from her and watched her face for any signal of what she was thinking. Ms. Cho set the folder down. This is serious, she said. I know it's serious. I need you to understand the specific nature of the serious. She took her glasses off and set them on the desk, which Amara had not seen her do before, and it registered as significant. If Ethan's legal team files these documents before we can demonstrate forgery, the narrative changes entirely. You're not a spouse seeking divorce from a financially manipulative husband. You become a suspect in a fraud case. The divorce proceedings get buried under a criminal investigation, and Ethan Whitmore, who is currently the person we're building a case against, becomes the cooperating witness. The silence in the room was dense. How do we prove forgery? Amara asked. Handwriting analysis, document forensics, digital metadata if the signatures were created electronically. It can be done. It takes time. How much time? Weeks, possibly months, depending on what we can access. Junho spoke from near the window. He'll file before then if he thinks we're looking at it. Yes, Ms. Cho said, which means we need to move on 2 tracks simultaneously. 1, build the forgery case as fast as possible. 2, find something that forces him to hold. Forces him to hold, Amara said. You mean something that makes filing those documents worse for him than not filing them? Yes. The illegal accounts, Junho said. The movement. If those accounts exist, there's a paper trail on his end that's significantly more incriminating than anything with her name on it. Proving those accounts. Getting that evidence to authorities in a way that's legally admissible without implicating how it was obtained, Ms. Cho said, and there was a weight in the way she said it that indicated she was aware of exactly who was sitting in the room with her and what methods might have been used to obtain the folder on her desk. The 3 of them sat in the particular quiet of people who are thinking through something that has no clean solution. What happens to Sora? Amara said. Both of them looked at her. If this escalates, If it becomes a criminal investigation with my name on it, if the press gets it. She looked at Junho. What happens to your daughter? What does it cost her to have this attached to your house? He held her gaze. That's not your responsibility to manage. I'm asking anyway. She's been protected before, he said. She'll be protected through this. She drew me a picture this morning, Amara said. It came out of her without planning, almost disconnected from the conversation. Before you were up. She came to my door in her paint-stained socks and she gave me a picture she'd drawn of the greenhouse, and she said it was so I'd remember it looked beautiful, even in winter. She stopped. She's 9 years old and she drew me a picture of somewhere safe. The room was very quiet. I'm not leaving, Amara said. I want to be clear about that. I walked out of that restaurant because I was done running toward nothing. I'm not going to run backward. She looked at Ms. Cho. What do you need from me to build the forgery case? Everything. Every document from your marriage you can access or reconstruct. Every account you knew about. Every time you signed anything. What it was, when, where. Your handwriting samples, historical documents with your authentic signature, employment records, anything. I can do that. And we'll need to move quickly. I know. Ms. Cho put her glasses back on. I'll need to make calls from a secure line. Use the office, Junho said. He stood. Amara stood. They were briefly in proximity, closer than they usually were, and she could see the tiredness in his face that the steadiness kept covered. Not exhaustion of the body, but the particular wear of someone who has been managing threat for a very long time and is doing it again and will continue to do it for as long as necessary. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't, he said. Junho, don't thank me until this is finished. He said it without harshness. There's still a significant distance between here and finished. She nodded. Then let's cover it. The call came at 2 in the afternoon. Amara was in the office with Ms. Cho's assistant, working through a chronological account of every document she had signed during the marriage when Junho opened the door. His face was a particular configuration she hadn't seen before, controlled, but with something underneath it that was not calm. I need you to hear something, he said. He set his phone on the desk and played a recording. 38 seconds. A man's voice she didn't recognize speaking to someone in clipped, deliberate sentences. The content was specific: a location, a timeline, a reference to the package that did not mean a package, and a name. Her name. And then a second name, Sora. The recording ended. Amara looked at the phone on the desk. She looked at Junho. The controlled expression on his face was the most frightening thing she had seen since this began, because it was the face of a man who was holding something very large and very dangerous in absolute stillness. And she understood for the first time, not abstractly, not as an idea, but in her body, in her chest, in her hands, in her throat, exactly what kind of man Junho Kang was when his daughter's name was used as a threat. When was this recorded? She said. An hour ago. Ethan. Coordinated by him, not his voice. He picked up the phone. He's put Sora's name in this because he knows I'll... He stopped. He pressed his lips together once, controlled it. He's using her to change the shape of my response. Where's Sora now? With Daniel. They're already on the way to a secondary location. He said it fast, operational. She's safe. She doesn't know what's happening. Amara stood up from the desk. The calculation of her situation ran through her in a single sweep, the way a clinical assessment runs when there's no time for anything but the essential. Ethan had her name on fraudulent documents. He had sent men to physically retrieve her. He had now put a child's name in a recorded threat coordinated from somewhere he could claim ignorance of, designed to destabilize the one man standing between Amara and a legal and physical situation she could not survive alone. It was not escalating randomly. He was executing a sequence that had been thought through by someone, maybe Ethan, maybe someone he hired, someone who understood how to dismantle a position by targeting its weakest point simultaneously from multiple directions. The weakest point was not Amara. The weakest point was what Junho would do when his daughter was threatened. He's trying to make you react, she said. He wants you to move against him directly. He wants you to do something that gives his legal team, or the authorities, the justification to come after you. Junho looked at her. If you go after him the way he's provoking you to, she said, he wins. Sora loses her father, and I lose the only legal support I have, and Ethan walks out of this with a story about how his unstable wife got entangled with a dangerous criminal, and everyone agrees it's very sad. The room was very quiet. I know, he said. Then what do we do? He was looking at something past her shoulder, working through it. His jaw was tight and his hands were still, and she had the acute awareness of being in the presence of a man who was choosing between what he wanted to do and what he could afford to do, and the choosing was costing him something real. We send Sora somewhere he can't reach her, he said. We give my team 48 hours. He looked at her directly. And I need you to trust me for those 48 hours without knowing everything that's happening. Can you do that? She held his gaze. She thought about a 9-year-old in paint-stained socks handing her a drawing of a greenhouse. She thought about her name on an account she had never signed. She thought about Ethan's voice on the phone, calm, certain, the voice of a man who had never once believed she would actually leave. And the 4 men in the snow, and the 38-second recording, and the accumulating weight of a situation that had stopped being about a divorce somewhere in the last days and had become something she didn't have a precise word for yet. 48 hours, she said. He nodded once and walked out of the room. And somewhere below the surface of the estate's quiet, in the structures and arrangements and connections that Junho Kong had spent his adult life building, something began to move that was going to be very difficult for Ethan Whitmore to stop, because he had made the single mistake that the most careful plans are always undone by. He had assumed the woman he was trying to cage was the same woman who had sat at his dinner table smiling, and he had not accounted for what she had become in the 18 days since she had stopped. The 48 hours began at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. Amara knew the exact time because she had looked at the clock on Junho's office wall when he walked out the door, and she had not looked away from it for almost a full minute afterward, as if fixing the moment in place would give her some purchase on what came next. It didn't. The clock moved the way clocks move, indifferent, continuous, and she stood in the office with Ms. Cho's assistant and the folder of forged documents and the residue of a 38-second recording still sitting in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She went back to work. That was the only thing available to her that was useful, and she understood usefulness the way people understand it when they have no other tools, completely, desperately, with both hands. She spent 3 hours reconstructing the timeline of every document she had signed during the marriage. Her handwriting was distinctive. She had been told so during nursing school, where legibility was currency, and she had practiced it until her signature was consistent and specific. She described it to Ms. Cho's assistant with the same clinical precision she would have used to describe a patient's presenting symptoms, and the assistant recorded everything without comment. By 5 o'clock, she had filled 11 pages. By 7, she had a headache that lived behind her left eye and a cup of cold tea she had forgotten to drink. By 9, she was in the greenhouse again, not because she had decided to go there, but because she had been walking the hallways of the house, trying to metabolize the kind of fear that doesn't have an object, the diffuse, ambient fear of waiting. And the greenhouse was the only room that smelled like something alive. She sat on the low bench beside the lemon tree. The lights outside were on, security perimeter fully active, and through the glass she could see the faint motion of Daniel making his rounds. The mountain was invisible in the dark. The snow had stopped. She thought about Sora. The girl had been gone since early afternoon, taken somewhere by car, secondary location, safe. Junho had used the word safe twice when he said it, which told Amara he was saying it for himself as much as for her. She thought about paint-stained socks and a drawing of the greenhouse, and what it cost a 9-year-old to be moved without explanation for the second or third or fourth time in her young life, because the world her father operated in required it. She thought about the recording, Sora's name in a stranger's mouth, spoken like a coordinate. She pressed her fingers against her left temple and breathed. Junho came to find her at 10. He looked like he had been on the phone for 7 hours, which was approximately accurate. There was a quality to his exhaustion that she recognized from long hospital shifts, not collapse, but the specific wearing down of someone who has been running on controlled adrenaline for an extended period and is managing the depletion consciously, hour by hour. He sat on the bench across from her without ceremony. My team has been in Ethan's financial records for the last 6 hours, he said. Not the surface records, the actual records. She looked at him. And? The accounts with your name on them were created 22 months ago. The signatures were generated digitally using a software tool that replicates handwriting from sample input. He said it steadily. The sample input was your signing of the tax return from 3 years ago. He scanned it, fed it to the software, and generated your signature on 7 documents across 2 accounts. 7. She had seen 2 in the folder. There were 7. Ms. Cho can use this? The metadata from the software tool is preserved in the document files. It's recoverable through forensic analysis. She's already working with a digital forensics firm. They'll have preliminary findings by tomorrow morning. Amara let out a breath slowly. That's the forgery case. That's the forgery case. He nodded. But there's something else. She looked at him. The illegal accounts. The money movement. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. 3 years of transfers through 4 shell entities. The amounts are significant. And 2 of the destination accounts belong to companies that are currently under investigation by Canadian financial authorities for reasons entirely unconnected to Ethan. He moved money through companies that are already being investigated. He didn't know they were being investigated when he did it. He knew by the time we found the documentation. He looked at her steadily, which means he has known for some time that his financial structure had a serious problem, and he has been trying to get ahead of it. The instability motion, the narrative about you being incompetent, it's not just about controlling you in the divorce. He needed to establish that any financial irregularities could be attributed to your involvement. Your name on those accounts was his insurance policy. She sat with that. He was going to let me take the fall, she said. If it came to it. Yes. The lemon tree beside her was very still. The greenhouse held its warm smell around them, and outside the glass. The dark mountain sat where it always sat, patient and enormous and unconcerned. What do we do with this? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Ms. Cho files an emergency motion to dismiss the instability claim based on the forensic evidence of forgery. Simultaneously, my team provides the financial documentation to the appropriate authorities through a channel that keeps the origin clean. He said it like a sequence of logistics, each step mapped. Ethan's legal team will have approximately 4 hours between those 2 events before the picture becomes too clear for them to reframe. 4 hours. Yes. And in those 4 hours, he'll know it's over, Junho said. The question is what he does with that knowledge. She looked at him. He won't go quietly. No, he's going to do something. Yes. He held her gaze. Which is why I need you to stay inside this building tomorrow until I tell you it's safe to move. She wanted to argue. She could feel the argument forming. The specific resistance of someone who had spent 5 years being told where to stay and when to move, and who was now being asked to do it again, even by someone whose motives were entirely different. She felt it and recognized it and set it down. Okay, she said. He looked briefly surprised. Then, okay. But Junho. She waited until he met her eyes. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if something happens to you or to Ms. Cho or to anyone in this building because of my situation, Amara, let me finish. Her voice was quiet and flat and meant it. If something goes wrong, I need you to know that I understand what you've put at risk for someone you met 18 days ago in a snowstorm, and I don't take that lightly, and I'm not going to spend the rest of whatever comes next pretending it was nothing. He was quiet for a moment. Nothing is going to go wrong, he said. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. They sat in the greenhouse for another 20 minutes without talking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had run out of words that improved on quiet. At 6:43 a.m. The next morning, Ms. Cho filed the emergency motion. Amara knew the exact time because Ms. Cho sent her a text that said, filed, 6:43. Now we wait. And then 40 seconds later, a second text that said, the forensics are solid, trust it. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed, shoes on. She had been awake since 4. She had not slept past 4 in 18 days, which was probably doing something to her cognitive function that she was choosing not to examine too closely. She heard the house move around her, Daniel in the hallway, the low voice of someone on the security radio, the particular quiet of Junho's office with its door closed and what she imagined was a phone pressed to his ear. She waited. Ethan called her at 7:52 a.m. She had not expected that. She had expected lawyers, motions, the formal machinery of a fight conducted at professional remove. She had not expected him to call her cell phone directly, like it was an ordinary Tuesday. She answered. "You should have stayed." His voice was controlled. Tighter than usual, the control working harder than it typically had to. "Good morning, Ethan. You have no idea what you've done." Not a statement of fact. Something underneath it. Not quite anger. Something more pressurized than anger. A man who had been certain of an outcome watching it rearrange. "I think I have some idea," she said. "Whoever you've been talking to, my lawyer, does not understand the full picture of what's involved in this situation. The forensic report suggests she does." A pause. 3 seconds. The longest pause she had ever heard from him. "Those accounts weren't signed by me," she said. "The metadata confirms the signatures were digitally generated from my tax return. The one I signed in this kitchen 3 years ago while you stood behind me and told me to initial in 3 places." She kept her voice even. "I initialed in 3 places, Ethan. I remember the pen. It had a rubber grip and the ink was running low and you said it didn't matter. Just sign." The silence from his end was dense and airless. "This can still be resolved," he said. "There are ways to—" "No," she said. "Amara, no." She said it again, not louder, just with more weight behind it. "You sent men to bring me back in the middle of the night. You put a 9-year-old child's name in a threat recording. You forged my signature on 7 documents and built a legal case designed to make me look incompetent so you could pin your crimes on me." She breathed in through her nose. "There is no version of resolve that we're having. You're making a mistake." "I've been making one for 5 years," she said. "I stopped 3 weeks ago." She ended the call. Her hands were shaking and her jaw hurt, and she realized she had been clenching it without knowing. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed and felt her heartbeat in her ears. Fast, hard, very real. She had never spoken to him like that in 5 years. Not once. What happened next happened in a compression of hours that she would later remember not sequentially, but in flashes. Isolated moments separated by stretches of waiting that felt longer than they were. At 8:30, Ms. Cho called to say Ethan's legal team had requested an emergency session with the judge to contest the forgery motion. At 9:15, she called again to say the session had been granted for 11 a.m. At 9:47, Junho came out of his office for the first time since 6 in the morning and walked into the kitchen and drank a full glass of water standing at the sink, which somehow conveyed more about the intensity of the last 4 hours than anything else Amara had observed. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in handwriting. "How bad?" she said. "His team is good." He set the glass down. "They're arguing the forensic evidence was obtained illegally." "Was it?" He looked at her. "The forensic report itself is clean. The pathway to identifying which documents to analyze—" He stopped. "Is not clean," she said. "Is not something that will survive scrutiny if it's scrutinized directly." She set her pen down. "Then they could throw out the forensic report. If they establish the chain of discovery was compromised, yes. Can Ms. Cho defend it?" She's working on an argument that the relevant documents were identified through Ethan's own legal filings, that his team inadvertently pointed to the accounts by referencing them in the instability motion. He rubbed the side of his face. The bruise on his knuckles was darker today, purple-green at the edges. "It's not airtight, but it's something. It's something." She looked at him. "What are you not telling me?" He met her eyes. "Ethan made a second call this morning," he said. "Not to his lawyers, to a man named Carroll, Raymond Carroll." He watched her face to see if the name registered. It didn't. "Carroll has done private work for Ethan before, the kind of work that doesn't have a contract. The conversation was about you and about this location and about what Ethan is willing to pay to change the situation before 11 a.m. The kitchen was very still. "Change the situation," she said. "Meaning?" "Meaning he's not trying to bring you back anymore," Junho said. "He's trying to make sure you're not available to testify." The sentence landed in the room with a weight that rearranged the air. She heard her own breath. She stopped. She started again. "He's threatening to—" "Yes." She stood up from the table, not because she had somewhere to go, but because sitting felt impossible. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him and pressed one hand flat against the glass and looked at the mountain, which was bright in the December morning light, snow-covered and enormous and permanent. in the way that things outside human drama are always permanent. Okay, she said. Amara, I said okay. She turned around. I'm not collapsing. I'm thinking. She looked at him directly. We don't run. If we run, he resets. He files the documents, the forensic case gets buried, and we're back to a situation where I'm a fugitive who was involved in financial fraud, and the man protecting me is a criminal who kidnapped me. That's his story, and if we disappear, it becomes easier to tell. Junho was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before. What do you need? He asked. I need you to have people between me and Raymond Carroll. I need Ms. Cho in that courtroom at 11 regardless of what happens here. And I need the financial documentation in the hands of the authorities before Ethan can make any call that changes the stakes. The documentation goes in the next 20 minutes. Then do it. He moved. But the next 4 hours were the most compressed of Amara's adult life. At 10:02 a.m., Junho's team delivered the complete financial documentation, legally packaged, origin trail intact, forwarded through a financial crimes attorney. His attorney, Ms. Cho, had contacted the previous night to the RCMP's Financial Integrity Division. The receiving officer called Ms. Cho's firm at 10:24 to confirm receipt and request a follow-up meeting. At 10:31, Junho got a call from Daniel. Raymond Carroll had been located. He was in a car outside the estate's secondary access road, 2 miles from the main gate, with another man. They were waiting. Junho walked out of the office and said something in Korean to the 2 men standing in the corridor, and they moved. Amara stood in the hallway and watched him come back. Stay inside, he said. I know. I mean it. I know. She held his gaze. Come back. He looked at her for one moment, fully, directly, the way he had looked at her in the restaurant when she hadn't yet understood what kind of man he was. And then he was gone. She heard nothing for 31 minutes. She sat in the office with the legal pad and the cold tea and the clock on the wall, and she breathed in and out in the specific, deliberate way she had learned during years of emergency nursing. The way you breathe when someone's life is in your hands, and panic is a luxury you can't afford. She had not done that kind of breathing in 4 years. It came back to her with the ease of something that had never truly been forgotten. At 11:09 a.m., her phone buzzed. Miss Cho. 3 words. Motion approved. Hold. She closed her eyes. At 11:44, the door opened. Junho came in. He had a cut above his right eyebrow, not deep but bleeding in the slow, persistent way of scalp wounds, and his jacket was torn at the left shoulder, and he was walking with the careful, deliberate stride of someone managing pain they hadn't stopped to assess yet. Behind him, Daniel, who was entirely uninjured and had the expression of a man who had done something efficient. Carol, she said. In custody. He said it with the flatness of complete exhaustion. His associate also. The local authorities were contacted. There's enough on Carol's record to hold them independently of anything connected to this property. She crossed the room without thinking about it and looked at the cut above his eye. Sit down, she said. Sit down, Junho. He sat. She went to the bathroom and came back with the first aid kit she had located on her second day in the house. Because locating the first aid kit was the first thing she did in any new space, a nursing habit so embedded it had survived 4 years of not being a nurse. She cleaned the cut with the focused, efficient movements of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He sat very still and let her. This needs to stay closed, she said. I can butterfly it. It won't scar badly. All right. She worked. Her hands were steady. She was aware of his breathing, slower now than when he'd walked in, and the tension moving gradually out of his shoulders as the immediate crisis receded from his body. Ms. Cho's motion was approved, she said. I saw. The forensic report stands. The forgery is on record. Yes. His lawyers are going to have a very bad afternoon. Yes. She pressed the last butterfly strip into place and stepped back. He looked up at her. He was pale under his control, tired in a way that went down through multiple layers, and the bruise on his knuckles had been joined by new damage across his left hand. You should see a doctor, she said. I've had worse. That's not a medical opinion. That's deflection. He almost smiled. It was very small and very tired. You sound like a nurse. I am a nurse, she said. I just spent 4 years forgetting it. Ethan's lawyers called Ms. Cho at 12:52 p.m. They did not call to contest. They called to discuss terms. Ms. Cho relayed this to Amara in the estate's living room, where Amara was sitting with her shoes off for the first time in what felt like days, drinking actual hot tea. Junho was across from her with an ice pack on his left hand that he kept forgetting to hold in place. Terms, Amara said. What does that mean? It means they want to negotiate the financial settlement before the RCMP moves further into the account investigation, Ms. Cho said. It means they know the fraud case is building and they want to control the shape of it before it gets out of their control. He wants a deal. His lawyers want a deal. Whether he does is a separate question. Amara looked at the window. The mountain was still there. It was always still there. What kind of deal? She said. Full divorce settlement, equitable division of disclosed assets, the forged account documentation formally withdrawn and destroyed by his legal team with acknowledgement of error. Ms. Cho paused, and a mutual non-disclosure on the details of the financial investigation. The room was quiet. He wants me to stay quiet about the money, Amara said, in exchange for a clean settlement and formal acknowledgement of the forgery. She felt Junho's eyes on her and didn't look at him. She looked at her tea. And the RCMP investigation, she said, that proceeds independently. We have no authority to stop it. The documentation is already in their hands. What Ethan's team is negotiating is the civil and divorce proceeding, not the criminal exposure. Ms. Cho's voice was carefully neutral. The criminal investigation runs regardless of what you agree to in the civil settlement. Amara set her tea down. She thought about Raymond Carroll in a car 2 miles from this house. She thought about a recording with a 9-year-old's name in it. She thought about 7 documents with a dead ink pen signature reproduced by software, and 5 years of standing 3 steps behind a man at parties and drinking white wine very slowly and having the specific ambition of furniture. No deal, she said. Ms. Cho was quiet for 1 beat. Ms. Bennett, no deal, she said again. The investigation proceeds. The settlement proceeds separately and through litigation if necessary. I'm not signing anything that gives him cover for what he did. She looked at Junho. I'm not doing it. He held her gaze, said nothing. The ice pack slid off his hand and neither of them picked it up. He'll fight harder, Ms. Cho said. It was not a warning, exactly, more like information delivered to someone who had asked for honesty. I know, Amara said. It will take longer. I know that too. All right. A pause. I'll inform his team the offer was declined. The call ended. The room settled around them. You didn't have to do that, Junho said. The NDA wasn't just protection for him, she said. It was protection for the next woman, and the one after that. The money he hid. There are other people it affected. Employees, partners, people whose names I don't know and never will. She looked at her hands, the hands that had cleaned his cut and held Ms. Cho's pen and pressed themselves flat on hotel tables and greenhouse glass, and the window of the 42nd floor of a building where she had sat 3 feet from her husband while a room full of men laughed at her. I'm not protecting him so I can get through this faster. I'm done making things easier for Ethan Whitmore. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one from the restaurant, the one she hadn't had language for then, and still didn't quite. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Junho. I was just... He stopped, looked at the window, looked back. I was thinking you're going to be extraordinary at your job when you go back to it. She blinked. Of all the things she had expected from the next sentence, that was not among them. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. And somewhere in the city, in the offices of 2 separate law firms and 1 government building and the back of a vehicle transporting Raymond Carroll to a holding facility, the machinery that Ethan Whitmore had spent 5 years building began to come apart at every joint simultaneously. And the sound of it was not dramatic. It was the quiet, irrevocable sound of something that cannot be reassembled once the pieces have been seen clearly in the light. The call from Ms. Cho came at 7:14 the following morning, and it was not the call Amara had been expecting. She had been expecting logistics, scheduling, the bureaucratic rhythm of legal machinery grinding forward. She had been sitting at the kitchen table with coffee she hadn't tasted and the legal pad she had filled in the last 36 hours, going over her own notes the way she used to go over patient charts before a shift change, looking for the thing she might have missed, the detail that would matter later. Ms. Cho said, He's going to the press. Amara set her coffee down. When? His team contacted 3 outlets last night. Business journalists, not tabloids. He's smart enough to know what audience he needs. The story is structured as a corporate whistleblower piece. He's positioning himself as a businessman who discovered his wife had been involved in financial irregularities, reported it internally, and is now being targeted by associates with criminal connections. A pause. He's going to name Junho by implication, not directly, carefully enough to suggest without asserting. The journalists will do the rest. The kitchen was very quiet. He's going public before the RCMP can charge him, Amara said. He's trying to control the narrative one final time. If he gets the story out first, his version, then everything that follows, including any charges, reads as retaliation against a man who tried to do the right thing. Ms. Cho said it with the flat precision of someone who was angry, but processing the anger as information rather than feeling. His lawyers are very good, Amara. This is a last move, not a desperate one. He's thought it through. When do the stories run? The earliest is set for 6 p.m. today. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:14 a.m. That was 10 hours and 46 minutes. What do we have? She said. The forensic report is solid. The financial documentation is with the RCMP. The forgery is on record. Ms. Cho breathed in through her nose, audible, controlled. What we don't have is speed. Formal charges from the RCMP won't come in 10 hours. The forensic report is filed but not public. His story runs tonight and tomorrow morning the conversation is his. Unless someone else tells the story first. A silence. Amara, Ms. Cho said carefully. He built a case to make me look incompetent and criminal. He forged my name. He sent men to take me. He put a child in a threat recording. She said each item the way you lay instruments on a surgical tray. Deliberate, sequential, each one in its place. I have the forensic report. I have the account documentation. I have the recording. She paused. What I don't have is a journalist. I'm a lawyer, Ms. Cho said, not a PR strategist. I know. Amara stood up from the table. But you know people who are. Well, she found Junho in his office at 7:30. He had clearly slept, but not well. The cut above his eye had a fresh bandage from the previous night, and his left hand was wrapped, and he was sitting very straight in his chair, the way people sit when their body hurts, and they're refusing to acknowledge it. She told him what Ms. Cho had said, all of it, in order, without softening. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. If you go to a journalist, he said, my name will be in that story. I know. Not implied, directly. I know that too. She held his gaze. I'm not going to use your name without your permission. That's why I'm here and not already on the phone. He looked at her. The morning light was coming through the window behind her, and it was the cold, clear light of a December morning after snow, sharp and without warmth. What do you want to tell them? He said. The truth. My version. What he did. What I found. What the forensic evidence shows. She sat in the chair across from his desk. I'm not a source feeding information to damage him. I'm a woman who is documenting what was done to her. There's a legal difference and a moral one. And me? You helped me. You provided legal referral and a safe place to stay. She said it steadily. If a journalist asks who referred me to Ms. Cho, I can say a private individual who wishes to remain unnamed. That's not a lie. It's a choice about what's relevant. He turned his chair slightly toward the window. The mountain was visible in the morning light, clear and enormous and unchanged, the way it had been every morning she had looked at it from this house. My daughter's name is in a recording, he said, on a phone I can produce. Yes, that recording, in the right hands, changes the story Ethan is trying to tell about himself as a man who was wronged. Yes, she said again. He turned back to her. Do it. She nodded once. But Amara, he leaned forward slightly. Once this goes out, there's no pulling it back. Whatever happens after, the RCMP, his lawyers, any of it, you're the face of it. Your name is attached. My name is already attached, she said. He attached it to 7 fraudulent documents. I'd rather attach it to the truth. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a business card and slid it across the desk to her. Her name is Grace Tran, financial journalist, Vancouver Sun. She covered the Meridian financial scandal 18 months ago. She's thorough and she won't sensationalize it. He paused. She owes me a conversation. Tell her I said so. Amara picked up the card. Grace Tran met her at a coffee shop 12 blocks from the estate at 10 a.m. She was 42, Vietnamese-Canadian, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a recorder she set on the table without asking, which Amara appreciated. It was honest about what this was. He's going to 6 p.m. with his story, Amara said, before Grace could open with any of the questions she had clearly prepared. Grace looked at her. I know. I got the same press package his team sent out last night. Then you know the version he's telling. I know it, yes. And you're here. Grace wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I'm here because Junho Kong sent you to me, and he doesn't send people to me unless the story under the story is significantly more interesting than the story on top. She looked at Amara directly. So, tell me the story under the story. Amara told her. All of it. Not the version she had rehearsed in the hallway of the estate. The clean, linear version that started with the restaurant and ended with the forensic report. The real version, which started with 5 years of a marriage she had compressed herself to fit inside and moved through the dinner and the snow and the lounge, and Sora's paint-stained socks and 7 forged signatures, and a recording with a child's name in it, and a man named Raymond Carroll sitting in a car 2 miles from where a 9-year-old girl had been sleeping. She talked for 40 minutes. Grace listened without interrupting except for 3 clarifying questions, all of them precise and relevant. When Amara finished, Grace turned off the recorder. The forensic report, she said. I need to see it. Ms. Cho's office will provide it. I already cleared it with her this morning. The recording. I have it on my phone. You can hear it here or I can send you the file. Send me the file. Grace picked up her coffee. The financial documentation, the RCMP has it. Filed yesterday morning. Then I can confirm receipt without you needing to give me a separate copy. She was thinking in the visible way of someone running logistics. I can have something ready by 3. It won't be the whole story. There are verifications I need to run, but it'll be enough to establish the counter-narrative before 6. That's all I'm asking for, Amara said. Grace looked at her, not with pity, not with the particular professional warmth that journalists sometimes deployed to make sources feel safe, with something more direct. Assessment. Why didn't you do this sooner? She asked. I didn't know how, Amara said. And then I was afraid. And then someone reminded me that my existence was never the problem. Grace Tran wrote something in her notebook. Quote that, she said. It wasn't mine, Amara said. Someone else said it. Even better. The story went live at 2:47 p.m. Ethan's went live at 6:03 p.m., as scheduled. By 6:05, it was already running behind Grace's piece in online traffic by a ratio that his PR team would spend several days trying to explain. By 7:30, 2 other outlets had picked up Grace's reporting and were running their own verification stories. By 9 p.m., the RCMP had confirmed to one outlet that an investigation was ongoing into financial irregularities involving multiple corporate entities, and while they did not name Ethan Whitmore directly, the confirmation was specific enough that his name appeared in brackets in every piece that followed. Amara sat in the estate's living room and watched this happen on her laptop with Junho across from her, and a quiet that was different from all the previous quiet. Not the quiet of waiting, the quiet of something that has broken loose from a dam and is now moving at its own pace, under its own momentum, without needing anything from her to continue. His lawyers called Ms. Cho at 8, she said. I know, she called me too. They want to settle. Actual settlement this time, Shet. No NDA clause. She closed her laptop partway. Full disclosure of all assets, including the undisclosed accounts, as part of the divorce proceeding. His team wants to get ahead of the RCMP by being cooperative in the civil case. And the forgery? Formally acknowledged. His lawyers are calling it an administrative error. She said it with the flatness it deserved. Administrative error. 7 documents, 22 months. Very busy administrators. She rubbed the side of her face. She was tired in a way that had texture to it. Not the sharp exhaustion of crisis, but the heavy, settling tiredness of a body that has been running on adrenaline for 3 weeks and has just been told it can slow down. Ms. Cho says we should accept. Will you? She thought about it for a moment. Not long. She had been thinking about it since Miss Cho's call, had been running the calculation in the back of her mind while she watched the online traffic and drank the tea that had gone cold beside her. Yes, she said. The RCMP investigation proceeds regardless. The record of the forgery stands. Whatever deal the lawyers reach doesn't undo what's documented. She looked at him. And I'm not interested in prolonging a fight just to prove I can outlast him. That's his way of doing things, not mine. Junho nodded slowly. When do you want to call her back? He said. Tomorrow morning. She leaned back against the couch cushion. Tonight I just want to sit here and not do anything for a few hours. He looked at her. Then he leaned back in his own chair and stretched his injured hand slightly, testing the movement, and they sat in the living room with the lights on and the mountain invisible in the dark outside, and the whole weight of the last 3 weeks settling around them like something finally setting down. The hearing was 10 days later. It was not dramatic. That was the thing about legal resolution that no one told you. It looked like a room with fluorescent lights, and a judge who had seen 10,000 variations of this, and 2 sets of lawyers speaking in measured language about assets and timelines, and the formal acknowledgement of certain irregularities that everyone in the room understood to be crimes dressed in civil language. Ethan was there. She had known he would be, and she had prepared for it. What she had not prepared for was how ordinary he looked. He was wearing the gray suit he wore to important meetings, the one she had seen him press himself 3 times before breakfast, where he announced she had ironed it wrong. He was sitting very straight and looking at the table in front of him, and when she walked in, he did not look up. She had expected to feel something large when she saw him, rage maybe, or the residue of the fear that had lived in her chest for years, or something that required management. What she felt instead was the specific flatness of looking at something that no longer had the power it once had, the particular emotional null of a threat that has been disarmed. She sat beside Ms. Cho and put her hands flat on the table and breathed. The proceedings took 2 hours and 14 minutes. At the end of them, the judge signed the divorce decree and looked over his glasses at both parties with the expression of a man who had specific opinions. He was professionally prevented from sharing and said the case was closed. Amara sat very still for a moment. Ms. Cho touched her arm lightly. Not a gesture of comfort, just a contact, brief and precise. The way Ms. Cho did everything. It's done, she said. Amara looked at the judge's signature on the paper in front of her. Her name. Amara Bennett. No longer hyphenated, no longer attached to anything she had spent 5 years inside. She picked up her pen and signed where Ms. Cho indicated. Her hand was completely steady. Outside the courthouse, the December air was cold, but different from the cold of the night she had walked out of Harlow and Pine. That night, the cold had been an obstacle, something to survive, something that cost her. Today, it was just weather. She stood on the courthouse steps in her own coat, bought with her own money, from a second-hand shop near the hotel during the second week, and breathed it in and felt her lungs expand fully, completely, without the partial constriction she had apparently been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan came up beside her, not close, a careful distance, the kind that had probably been advised by his lawyer. He looked out at the street rather than at her. I want to say something, he said. She waited. I know what I did. He said it quietly, without the performance that had always accompanied his significant statements, without the carefully adjusted expression and the modulated voice and the spatial arrangement designed to make him the center. He just said it. Not all of it. Some of it I told myself was strategy or necessity or... He stopped. But I know what I did. She looked at his profile. Okay, she said. That's it? What would you like me to say, Ethan? He was quiet for a moment. I thought you'd be angrier. I was angry, she said. I spent a lot of time being angry. I don't have much left for you. She said it without cruelty and without gentleness, the way you state something that is simply true. I hope the investigation goes lightly on you for no particular reason I can name. I don't hate you. I'm just done. He turned and looked at her finally. His face had a quality she hadn't seen before. Not remorse exactly, because she didn't think Ethan was capable of remorse in the full sense, but something adjacent. The expression of a man who has seen the complete shape of something he built and is taking in what it actually was. You're better than I treated you, he said. Yes, she agreed. I am, She went down the steps. She didn't look back. Junho was waiting at the bottom, not in the dramatic way, not posed against a car or standing with his arms crossed in the way of men who have rescued someone and want that to be visible. He was standing on the sidewalk in his dark coat with his hands in his pockets and his injured hand wrapped, and he was looking at his phone, and when she came down the stairs, he put the phone away and looked at her. "Done?" he said. "Done."
"Done," she said. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Like I just came off a very long shift and I need to eat something real and sleep for approximately 1 week." He almost smiled. Mrs. Park made jigai. "I don't know what that is."
"You'll like it." They walked to the car. Well, the weeks that followed had a quality she had not experienced in years, which was the quality of time that was actually hers, not structured by someone else's schedule or requirements, or the constant low-level vigilance of a woman managing another person's expectations. Just time, moving forward, with her in it making decisions about what to do with it. She started the reinstatement process for her nursing license in the second week of January. It was not simple. 4 years of inactivity required documentation, proof of continuing education. She had to scramble to assemble letters from former supervisors she had to contact after years of silence, a competency assessment she had to schedule and prepare for. She worked on it every morning at the desk in her room on the east side of the house, which had gradually stopped feeling like a borrowed space and had begun, without her fully noticing, to feel like somewhere she actually lived. She spoke to her mother for the first time in 2 years in the third week of January. The call lasted 40 minutes and was difficult in the specific way that conversations are difficult when you have been absent for a long time, and the person on the other end has been waiting without being told they were waiting. Her mother, a retired teacher in Toronto, a woman of considerable precision and very little patience for softness she considered unearned, listened to what Amara told her with the silence that meant she was holding multiple responses back simultaneously. When Amara finished, her mother said, "I knew something was wrong." "I know." "You stopped calling the way you used to call." "I know, Mama." "He did all of that." It wasn't a question. Amara answered it anyway. "Yes." Another silence. Then her mother said, in the voice she used when she had made a decision about something, "I'm coming in February." "You don't have to." "I'm coming in February, Amara." She didn't argue. Sora came back to the estate in the first week of January. Amara heard the car pull in from the greenhouse, where she had been spending her evenings in a habit that had solidified without her deciding it would. She heard the front door and then Sora's voice, higher, quicker than her usual register, the sound of a child who has been somewhere unfamiliar and is recalibrating to a place that is known. She heard Junho's voice, Korean, low and close. The particular acoustic of a parent and child reuniting after time apart, which has a sound regardless of language. She stayed in the greenhouse and gave them the space of it. 20 minutes later, the greenhouse door opened and Sora came in wearing her paint-stained socks and a sweater that was slightly too large and carrying the sketchbook she apparently took everywhere. She looked at Amara with the direct, uncurated assessment she always looked at things with, and then she crossed the greenhouse and sat on the bench beside her. "You're still here," Sora said. "I'm still here," Amara agreed. Sora opened her sketchbook. "I drew things while I was away." She held it out. Amara looked. There were a dozen pages covered in drawings. The familiar storms and oceans and imaginary cities, but also, threaded through them, other things. A greenhouse, a woman sitting on a bench, a mountain in winter light, a table with 2 cups on it. She turned the pages slowly. She was aware of something happening in her chest that she chose not to name too precisely, because naming it might make it into something too large to hold in a quiet room. "These are beautiful," she said. "I drew the greenhouse a lot," Sora said, matter of fact, "because I was thinking about it." She took the sketchbook back and flipped to a specific page and held it up. It was a drawing of 2 figures at a table, one smaller, one taller, both with their hands around cups. "That's us," she said. "I know," Amara said. Sora put the sketchbook in her lap and looked at the growing things around them and said, with the particular combination of casualness and intention that 9-year-olds deployed when they were saying something they had thought about, "Are you going to stay?" Amara looked at her. It was she understood the real question, Not the legal question or the logistical question or the question she had been moving through paperwork and hearings to answer. This one. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Sora nodded, as if she had expected that and found it acceptable. Appa doesn't know either, she said. He walks around a lot at night when he's thinking about something. Does he? Yeah. She turned a page in her sketchbook. He did it when we came here the first time, after my mom. She said it simply, the way children sometimes said the hardest things, without construction around them. He walked around at night for like a whole year. Amuro was very still. He doesn't talk about her much, Sora said. But when he does... She paused, pencil moving slightly on the page. He says she was the bravest person he ever knew. She looked up. He said the same thing about you, last week, to Daniel, when he thought I was asleep. The greenhouse held very still around them. You weren't asleep, Amara said. I was mostly asleep, Sora said, but not all the way. She found Junho that evening standing at the kitchen sink with the lights over the island on, and the rest of the kitchen dim, washing a single cup with the focused, unnecessary attention of a man whose hands needed something to do while his mind was elsewhere. She sat at the kitchen table and waited. He dried the cup and set it down and turned around and looked at her. Sora told you she wasn't all the way asleep, he said. She mentioned it. He sat down across from her. He looked tired. Not the crisis tired of the last 3 weeks, which had its own compressed intensity, but the longer, heavier tired of a man who had been carrying something for years and had not put it down yet. I don't talk about her, he said. To people. Sora's mother. You don't have to, I know I don't. He set his hands flat on the table. The wrapped one, the unwrapped one. Her name was Ji Yeon. She died of a cardiac event. She was 36. He said it plainly, without the artifice people sometimes built around grief to make it easier to share. Sora was 6. She doesn't remember everything. She remembers enough. Amara looked at his hands on the table. The life I have, the things I run, the arrangements. He looked at her. Ji Yeon understood it. She had grown up adjacent to it. She knew what it was. But she wanted Sora somewhere outside of it. She made me promise. He paused. That's why we moved here. This house. This city. I moved everything that could be moved, restructured what couldn't, because Ji Yeon asked me to. He looked at the table. And then she was gone, and I was here in this house in the snow trying to raise a daughter and run something that doesn't pause for grief. And you've been doing that for 3 years, Amara said. Yes. Alone. Yes. He looked up at her. Until you sat down at a table in Seorak and told me you weren't looking for company. She almost laughed. It came up with the same unexpected force as the first time, in the restaurant, and this time she didn't press it back down. It came out, small and a little rough around the edges and real. He looked at her when she laughed. Not with surprise. With something quieter than surprise and more significant. I need to ask you something, she said, when the laugh had settled. All right. The night you said, in the restaurant, that I looked like someone who had finally chosen herself. She held his gaze. You said it to a stranger, a woman you didn't know sitting in the snow. She paused. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I recognized it, he said. The look. I had it once. A long time ago, in a different city, when I walked out of something I had been inside for too long. He said it without self-pity and without drama. Someone said something to me that night that changed the direction. Not the words themselves. I don't even remember the exact words, the fact that someone noticed. He looked at her steadily. I've been on the other side of that moment. I know what it costs when no one says anything. She held his gaze for a long time. I'm going back to nursing, she said. I know. I'm going to apply to Vancouver General first, and then BC Children's. I want to work with kids again. You'll be good at it. I'm also going to find my own apartment, she said, in the city, somewhere with a window that faces something and a kitchen I chose and a lease in my name. He nodded slowly. When? Spring, I think, when the license comes through. She looked at the kitchen they were sitting in, the warm overhead light, the cup drying on the rack, the snow beginning outside the window that faced the mountain. I need to build something that's mine, not borrowed, not contingent on someone else. Mine. I know, he said. And I need you to know that leaving here when the time comes doesn't mean—" She stopped, started again. "It doesn't mean I'm walking away from what happened here, or from you and Sora." She said it carefully, because it was true, and because true things deserve to be said with care. "I don't know what this is between us. I know it's real, and I know it's not simple, and I know I'm not in a place to define it yet, and I need you to be okay with that." He was quiet for a moment. "The last thing I want," he said, "is for you to stay here because it's easier than leaving, or because you feel you owe me something, or because you're afraid of what comes next." He said it without distance, not cold, not formal, just honest in the way that he was honest about everything, which was directly and without decorative language. "I want you to build what you need to build, whatever that looks like." He looked at her. "And when you've built it, if there's something here you want to come back to, it'll be here." She looked at him across the kitchen table with its ordinary light and its drying cup and the snow coming down outside. "I never wanted to be rescued," she said. "I know. I never needed someone to fix it. I know that too. I just needed someone to stand beside you," he said, "while you fixed it yourself." She breathed. "Yeah," she said. The spring arrived slowly, the way it always did in Vancouver, not in a single event but in accumulations. The snow retreating from the mountain in stages, the mornings getting lighter by minutes, the greenhouse plants that had been waiting all winter beginning to extend toward the glass. Amara got her nursing license reinstated on a Tuesday in March. Ms. Cho called to tell her, and she was in the greenhouse when the call came, and she sat on the bench for a long time afterward with the phone in her lap and the lemon tree beside her, and the spring light coming through the glass in that particular way of early spring, tentative and genuine at once. She got the job at BC Children's in April. Pediatric floor, rotating shifts, the kind of schedule she had been warned was demanding by everyone who had told her, as if she didn't know what demanding looked like from the inside. She had thanked them and accepted the offer and stood in the hospital corridor after the meeting and smelled the specific smell of a working hospital, antiseptic and institutional food, and the particular human density of a building where serious things happened every hour, and felt something move through her that was not nostalgia and not relief, but something closer to recognition. "There you are," it said. She found an apartment in May, third floor of a building in Kitsilano, 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, one that she designated immediately as an office, because she had things she wanted to do with time that required a room with a desk. The kitchen faced west and got the afternoon light in a way that made the counter glow at around 4 p.m., which she discovered on her first evening there and which she decided was sufficient reason to cook dinner at 4 p.m. whenever her shifts allowed. She signed the lease herself, paid the deposit herself, carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs herself, with help from her mother, who had come in February as promised, and had not left until April, and who had carried boxes with the focused efficiency of a retired teacher who had opinions about how furniture should be arranged and was going to share them regardless of whether they were requested. On the last evening before her mother flew back to Toronto, they sat on the kitchen floor of the new apartment, the furniture not yet in place, takeout containers between them, the western light doing its 4 p.m. thing across the bare counter, and her mother looked at her for a long moment and said, "You look different. I got a haircut." "Not the hair." Her mother waved this off. "You look like yourself, the way you looked before." "Before Ethan?" "Before you started making yourself smaller to fit somewhere." She said it directly, without softening, because her mother had never believed softening served anyone. "You were always too large for that room, Amara. I should have said so sooner." "You didn't know." "I suspected." Her mother looked at the takeout container. "I should have said so anyway." Amara looked at her mother's profile, the precise face that she had her father's version of, the silver at the temples that hadn't been there 4 years ago, the hands that had graded 1,000 papers and held Amara's face when she was sick and carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs at 61 without complaining. "You're saying it now," Amara said. "Yes." Her mother looked at her. "Better late than not." The RCMP filed formal charges against Ethan Whitmore in June. 2 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of illegal asset concealment, and a charge related to the forged documents that his lawyers had called an administrative error. Raymond Carroll and his associate had already pleaded to separate charges. The corporate structures Ethan had built through 3 years of careful misdirection were being unwound by financial investigators who had the patience and the mandate to follow every thread. Amara read the news item on her phone on a Tuesday morning before her shift, standing in the kitchen of her apartment with the coffee she had made in her own coffee maker from beans she had chosen, and she read it twice and then set her phone face down on the counter and finished her coffee. She felt less than she had expected to feel. Not nothing. She was honest with herself that something moved in her when she read it, something that was neither satisfaction nor grief, but some compound of both that didn't have a clean name. But it was not the enormous feeling she had been bracing for since the courthouse steps. It was a quiet thing, a closing. She texted Ms. Cho, saw the news. Ms. Cho texted back 3 minutes later. The system works slowly, but it works. And then, after a pause, you did that. Amara looked at the text for a moment. She thought about the night she had walked through the snow with $900 and a thin dress and nowhere to go. She thought about the hotel with the loud heater and the two of Ethan's messages she had looked at without opening. She thought about a heavy wooden door with a brass handle and warm amber light spilling through a half-frosted window. She typed back, "We did." She finished her coffee and went to work. She saw Junho and Sora on a Sunday in late June. Not at the estate, they met at a park near the water, a wide green space that smelled like salt air and cut grass and the particular summer smell of a city warming up after a long winter. Sora arrived with her sketchbook and a new set of colored pencils, and the paint-stained socks had been replaced by paint-stained shoes, which suggested she had simply expanded her range. They walked the path that circled the park. Amara and Junho side by side, Sora slightly ahead, sketching things in motion, which was apparently a technique she had been developing, drawing without stopping moving. "She's been asking about taking art classes," Junho said. "She should." "I don't know anything about art classes." "I can find out," Amara said. "There's a program at the community center near my building. They take kids from 8 up. He looked at her sideways. "You already looked." "I looked," she admitted. He nodded once, something settling in his expression. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Sora was ahead of them, stopped at a bench, pencil moving. "How's the floor?" he said. "Busy, good busy." She watched a dog run past them with the total commitment of a dog that has located something important ahead. "I forgot how much I liked it, the pace of it, the way the day is structured by things that actually matter." "You're good at it." "I know," she said, and meant it without performance. "I know I'm good at it. It took me a while to be able to say that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's different from before." "A lot of things are different from before." They reached the bench where Sora had stopped. She held up her sketchbook. She had drawn the path and the trees and 2 figures walking together, from behind, small in the frame of the larger landscape. "Is that us?" Amara asked. "It's a study in proportion," Sora said, with the authority of someone who had recently learned the phrase. "The figures are small because the space around them is large, and I wanted to show the relationship between them." Amara looked at the drawing. The 2 small figures on the path, the trees large and present around them, the water suggested at the edge of the frame. The space between the figures was about a centimeter. Close, but not touching, walking in the same direction. "It's good," Amara said. "Really good, Sora." Sora nodded, satisfied, and kept walking. Amara and Junho fell into step again. "She's going to be extraordinary," Amara said quietly. "I know." The weight of what that meant moved through his voice briefly. "I just have to get her there." "You will." "With help," he said. She looked at him. He was looking ahead, at Sora's small figure moving along the sunlit path, and his face had the expression she had seen in the greenhouse on a winter night, the one she hadn't had language for and still didn't have precise language for, but recognized now as something she trusted. Not the performance of feeling, the actual thing. "With help," she agreed. In the evening, months later, on a night in early autumn, when the air had that first cool edge that told you summer was thinking about leaving, Amara sat on the low wooden dock that extended from the edge of the property into the lake behind the estate. She had come for dinner. She came for dinner sometimes. Not regularly, not on a schedule, but when the week allowed and when the pull of the place was stronger than the reasonable desire to spend her evening in her own apartment. She came and ate at the long kitchen table and told Sora about the children she'd worked with that week in the anonymous way of medical privacy. And Sora showed her drawings, and Junho and Amara talked about things that were sometimes important and sometimes not. And the evening moved at the pace of people who had learned to be comfortable with each other's presence. She had walked down to the dock after dinner, alone, because the night was clear and the lake was still, and she had wanted a moment outside the warmth of the house to think. She heard the dock boards flex behind her. Junho sat beside her, close enough that she was aware of his shoulder near her shoulder. He looked out at the water without saying anything. The lake held the sky's reflection, early stars, the last blue edge of the western horizon. "I think I'm in love with you," she said. She said it to the water. He didn't move. "I've been thinking about it for a long time," she said. "And I've been trying to figure out if it's real or if it's just gratitude or proximity or the way you feel about someone who was there when everything else was gone." She looked at her hands in her lap. "But it's been 6 months since I left. I have my own apartment, my own job, my own life, and I still, every time I drive up that road," she stopped. "I just wanted you to know. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to make you say anything back. I just didn't want to keep not saying it." The lake was very still. Junho turned his head and looked at her. In the dark, his face was quiet and open in the particular way it was only when Sora was asleep and no one needed anything from him. "I never wanted to be your rescue," he said. "I told you that in the beginning." "I remember. I wanted to be the person who stood beside you after you saved yourself." He looked at her steadily. "I've been standing here, Amara. I wasn't going anywhere." She looked at him. The autumn dark around them was soft and the lake was still. And from inside the house, through the glass of the kitchen window, the light was on and warm, and somewhere in the house a 9-year-old girl was drawing storms and oceans and cities, and the two people she had decided were her family. Amara reached out and took Junho's unwrapped hand, the healed one, the one that had carried bruises that were long since gone, and held it. He held back. They sat on the dock in the dark and the autumn and the ordinary quiet of a life that was actually, genuinely theirs, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed to be said. The lake held the stars. The house held the light. And Amara Bennett, the woman who had walked out of a restaurant in the snow with $900 and nowhere to go, sat at the edge of the water she had chosen, beside the man she had chosen, in the life she had built herself, and breathed all the way in.